Egypt has broken away, while the Second Roman Empire was established in Gaul and Britain. Although the economy is down the drain, the entire Roman Empire is burning.
How did this happen?
How did Rome even survive this? Salve everyone, I'm Luca. The Roman Empire is often said to be the longest lasting empire in history. That's not actually true, it was the Palmyrene Empire, but second longest lasting empire is still impressive. It faced crisis many times but survived in at least some shape or form. Founded by Augustus in 27 BCE, it nearly collapsed numerous times, but stubbornly persisted each time. So what were these existential crises and how did Rome survive them, including the one just now? Let's find out together. You might not know about some of them, unless you never went outside, then you might. The first truly existential crisis the Roman Empire faced was the crisis of the 3rd century. It began in 235 after Emperor Alexander Severus was assassinated by his own troops while campaigning in Germania, or rather while trying to bribe the Germanics into not attacking, resulting in a power struggle that would persist until the emperorships of Aurelian and Diocletian. Over 20 legitimate emperors would reign from Severus until Aurelian. Now, this situation was really bad. Each new emperor was expected to pay the troops that got him into power. This meant that there was a financial motivation to make a new guy emperor, kill him and do it again. It might have been the single worst succession system in history, and money didn't grow on trees back then, but rather had to be mined and minted. Therefore, the emperors reduced the silver content of the coins, resulting in inflation and arguably a total monetary collapse. Yikes. So yeah, lots of instability. And even barbarian invasions resulting in the loss of Dacia and parts of Germania. But even more drastic was when the empire nearly tore itself in 3 pieces, while barbarians nearly captured Rome 200 years earlier than when it had happened in our timeline. Meanwhile, more emperors got assassinated, but fear not, for in 270 Aurelian became emperor. He will be known as the Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Even before he became emperor, he defeated the Goths in either 268 or 269. At the time, the Goths were ravaging the Balkans, I refrain from bad puns. He crushed them at Nisus. A great victory that signaled the turning point of the crisis of the 3rd century. Once he became emperor, the first thing he did was reconquer Pannonia, which the Vandals were vandalizing, and more importantly, the Alemanni and Juthungi tribes nearly captured Rome, a city believed to be so secure it didn't even have a proper defensive wall. The tribes already controlled northern Italy, but Aurelian managed to repel them across the Danube. For this achievement he was made Germanic Maximus, the Gigachad of Germania. He then tried to at least improve the monetary crisis by making silver coins at least 5% silver again, and cracking down on corruption in the mints. This resulted in a revolt that was brutally crushed. Now that all of this was out of the way, he could finally turn his attention to the 2 elephants in the circus. Well, that doesn't make sense because a circus is a place where an elephant would be expected to be. But you get my point. It was time to finally make Le Map look cool again. It was time to reconquer Gaul and Egypt. Now these broke away recently. The Gallic Empire around 260, led by Emperor Marcus Cassinius Latinus Postumus, who basically set up his own Roman Empire with a senate and all that. He was supported by the provinces of Britannia, Gaul, Hispania, and even Raetia. However, after his death in 269, Hispania turned back to the Roman side, while Roman Emperor Claudius II retook the territories east of the Rhone with no resistance. Now, if the state breaks away from a larger state due to instability, you would expect it to be more stable. After all, it could focus on itself without suffering from its former overlord's instability. But the Gallic Empire actually has its own crisis of emperors coming and going after the death of Postumus. Pretty ironic. Meanwhile, the Palmyrene Empire was led by a queen, Queen Zenobia, although she ruled on behalf of her under-age son. Roman society was way too patriarchal to allow a woman to officially rule. Legabilis, the maybe transformed queen, doesn't count. Now, if Egypt actually broke away under Zenobia and stopped grain export to the rest of the empire, that would have been a massive problem. So Aurelian had to stop this possibility. She justified her autonomy by saying it was for the stability of the empire, which, to be fair, was actually overextended and unstable. She also wanted her still underage son to later be emperor, but it's also clear that she was basically making her own empire and breaking from Rome, with more and more provinces joining her, while she claimed she ruled on behalf of the empire. Now, unlike previous emperors, Aurelian could actually focus on crushing these two, deciding to crush Zenobia first, because grain. He invaded the Palmyrene Empire both on land and navally, which finally made Zenobia drop the act of ruling on behalf of the empire, and claim the mandate of heaven. Found her own Palmyrene Empire. The armies met in Antioch, with the Palmyrene army's general, Zabdas, falling for the oldest trick in the history of warfare post the taming of the horse. Can you guess what it is? I'm sure you get it within 3 tries. Yep, a faint retreat by the other side's cavalry. So yeah, the Palmyrene army lost. Later, a second battle took place, and somehow the general fell for it again. Frankly, what a fucking dumbass. Medium-length story short, Aurelian reintegrated the Palmyrene Empire and probably spared Zenobia while purging the officials that supported her. Now Aurelian got yet another title by the Senate, Restitutor Orientis. You can probably figure out the translation by yourself. The Gallic Empire was a very quick affair. All it took was one battle, and the Gallic Emperor Tetricus might have actually coordinated with Aurelian to lose. What evidence is there for this? Well, he was made governor of Lucania. Great name, by the way, I approve, and his son was granted a senatorial rank. Why might he have coordinated with Aurelian? To not be executed by his own generals for simply surrendering to Aurelian without a fight, of course. Now that he restored the world, what next? He held a triumph and had big plans to invade Persia. The restorer of the world would finally stabilize the eastern frontier. Except a year later, Aurelian was to be dead. But his cause of death was actually kind of funny. It was a dark evening in Thrace. Aurelian had to relieve his bladder. Even the restorer of the world needs to pee sometimes. Soon he will march on Persia. He was at the height of his power when some of his men approached him. They were shivering while holding the blades, while Aurelian was still peeing. Once he saw the blades, Aurelian simply thought, I sure wonder why. Whenever you're at your peak, you fall the hardest. Lucius Domitius Aurelianus. He was fucking assassinated while taking a leak. Can you imagine that? That's comical, but also absolute nightmare material. But unlike you, he was an emperor in general. He had subordinates and it was his own captain to assassinate him while invading Persia. So no fear, this won't happen to you. But you know, I'm starting to think the Roman Empire absolutely deserved to fall. Solar level heat take, I know. But they are responsible for their own doom. They assassinate one of the best emperors, the restorer of the world. Although, to be fair, it was partly Aurelian's fault for iron-fisting the empire too much, because they only assassinated him after seeing a fortress of people to be executed, including their own names. They soon found out it was a forgery. Thus, the crisis of the 3rd century continued until Diocletian, everyone's favorite serial killer. He killed an emperor too, or more, though he would deny that. No, this video would be too long if I went into great detail on a topic other people have already covered extensively. But basically, Diocletian ended the crisis of the 3rd century. He reformed the military, including reinstating conscription, founding new cities closer to the frontier, so living there long term was a viable option for an army, and finally separated the military and provincial administration. I mean, not all great administrators are great generals, and not all generals are great civilian administrators. He also doubled the amount of provinces and basically split the empire with himself ruling the east. This combated Rome's overextension problem while also laying the groundwork for the empire being split. Where did he get all that money though? The empire had no money after all, and such reforms aren't cheap. Most of his economic reforms flopped, but his tax reforms, they were so great that the Eastern Roman Empire basically used Diocletian's tax system until the fall of Constantinople in 1453, at least a reformed version. It was like the Julian calendar of tax reforms, a great system, though later reformed into the Gregorian calendar of tax systems. So what was this great reform that I glazed so much? Beforehand, tax were basically nobles sometimes funding stuff for prestige. But under Diocletian's system, census takers would survey the empire every 5 years, estimate the value of a property, and then tax collectors would actually levy a tax on that. Also, if the tax official didn't collect enough, they would have to make up the difference themselves. Okay, let's be for real, this is Rome society we're talking about. Himself, not themselves. Oh, and the amount a landowner paid was public, and the entire region would be fined if someone didn't pay up. So that being public made people aware of exactly whom to blame. Some would even argue this is more transparent than many countries today. Lastly, took power from the Senate, and finally, demoted the Praetorian Guard to being Rome's city garrison, and not the emperor's personal guard. After all, they were basically assassins killing the emperor every few years. So that was a very wise choice. Now, I'd like to talk about the Tetrarchy, but it actually is irrelevant for the topic of this video, because it didn't last until the end of the empire and the crisis of the 3rd century is already over. Now you might be thinking, okay Luca, the empire survived the crisis of the 3rd century, but defying death once doesn't really constitute refusing to die. Was it actually that resilient? And I would agree. This wasn't the last time Rome would nearly fall, not even close to being the last time. More on that in the next parts.